The millionaire's blood debt. The baby's cry pierced the silence like a blade through winter air. Jackson Reed stood over the carved oak cradle, hands trembling as he held the empty bottle of goat's milk. Dawn crept through frosted windows, cold and gray. Outside, the blizzard that had buried the roads 3 days ago still howled against the stone walls of his Montana mansion. Little Grace, named for a grandmother she would never know, turned her head weakly, lips pale as the snow piling outside. She wouldn't take the goat's milk, hadn't for hours. Jackson's throat tightened. He was a man who'd built a cattle empire, who'd turned Montana grassland into wealth. But money meant nothing now. Gold couldn't buy what his daughter needed. It couldn't bring back the woman who died giving life to this child. Jackson glanced at the portrait above the mantel. Margaret, golden hair, gentle smile, eyes the palest blue. Dead 3 months, buried in frozen ground beside the family chapel. "Forgive me," he whispered. "I don't know how to do this alone." Grace's cry faded to a whimper. Jackson's chest caved. He'd survived the war between the states, business wars, droughts, betrayals. But this, watching his daughter slip away in a house full of useless wealth, this was breaking him in ways no man should break. He walked to the tall window, brushed away the frost, stared past the empty corrals and snow-buried fences toward the slopes of his 10,000-acre ranch. A single light flickered a mile up the slope. The neighbor's cabin. A woman lived there. Widow, he'd heard. Kept to herself. She'd arrived in the valley 6 months ago, before Margaret had even gone into labor. He grabbed the bottle of whiskey from his desk, uncorked it with his teeth, and took a long pull. The liquid burned, but not enough to cauterize the wound inside him. When Dr. Wilson had left yesterday, the bottle of laudanum he'd pressed into Jackson's hand had said everything. "To make her comfortable," the doctor had murmured, not meeting his eyes. Jackson hurled the whiskey bottle against the wall. It shattered, amber liquid streaming down expensive wallpaper like blood. 3 sharp knocks at the door froze him mid-curse. It was barely dawn. No one traveled in this weather. The knocking came again, steady and sure. Jackson crossed the room, boots echoing on marble floors Margaret had never wanted. His right hand settled on the grip of his Colt Peacemaker, the same gun that had helped build his fortune and reputation across 3 counties. He pulled open the heavy oak door. Standing in the snow was a woman wrapped in a deep blue wool shawl, dark hair dusted with white. Her eyes were downcast but steady. "Mr. Reed," she said softly, "I heard the baby crying on the wind last night." Jackson stared, uncomprehending, hand still on his pistol. "Who the hell are you?" "I can help," she continued, "if you'll allow it." Jackson's pride reared up like a wild horse. He was a Reed. His family had owned this valley for 2 generations. He didn't take charity, didn't need help from strangers. "How do you know about my child? Who are you?" His voice was rough, suspicious. The woman lifted her gaze. Her eyes were calm, unflinching. "Sarah Hargrove, 32 years old. I live in the cabin north of the ridge. I lost my son last spring. My milk never stopped." Jackson's breath caught. He opened his mouth to refuse, to send her away, but Grace whimpered behind him, and the sound broke something in his chest. His fingers tightened on his gun. "Why would you help us? What do you want?" "Nothing," she replied. "Keep your hand on that gun if it makes you feel safer." Jackson studied her face, searching for deceit. Finding none, he stepped aside, allowing her entry while maintaining his wary stance. "One false move." "I understand," Sarah said, stepping past him into the warm house, snow melting from her boots. She moved straight to the cradle with practiced gentleness that spoke of experience with children. Jackson followed, instinct telling him to stop her, but his legs wouldn't obey. She lifted Grace with practiced care, cradling the tiny body against her chest while she sat down in the chair by the fire, and unwrapped her shawl. "Turn away if you need to," she said quietly. Jackson did. He stood facing the cold window, jaw tight. He heard the soft rustle of fabric, then silence. Not the terrible silence of a dying child, but the peaceful silence of life returning. When he glanced back, Grace had latched, her small hands curled against the woman's skin. Color was already rising in her cheeks. Jackson's knees buckled. He caught himself on the back of a chair. Sarah hummed low and steady, a lullaby he recognized. Margaret used to hum it while sewing baby socks. "You don't know me, ma'am," Jackson said, voice breaking. "I know grief, Mr. Reed," she replied without looking up. "That's enough." 20 minutes passed, maybe more. Grace drank, then slept in the woman's arms, breathing deep and even. Sarah stood, placed Grace back in the cradle, and wrapped her shawl tight. "I'll come back tomorrow morning before dawn," she said. "She'll need feeding every few hours." Jackson found his voice. "Why would you trek through a blizzard for strangers?" Sarah's expression remained steady. "Before I arrived in this valley, I studied everything about it. I know who you are, Mr. Reed, a former field surgeon who became a cattle baron, a man who lost his wife in childbirth. I've seen grief consume good men before." "How do you know all this?" His suspicion returned, sharp as a blade. "I make it my business to know my neighbors, especially in wild country." Her eyes met his, and for a moment, recognition flickered between them, the kind that comes only from shared hardships. "I'll return at dawn." Jackson locked the door behind her and sank into the chair, staring at his sleeping daughter. He'd opened a door he couldn't close. Somehow he didn't want to. Spring came slowly to Montana. As the snow retreated, Grace thrived. Each day, Sarah arrived before dawn, fed Grace, then helped around the house. She never asked for payment. Jackson never offered. They settled into an uneasy truce built around the child's needs. Jackson watched her, searching for motives beyond the simple explanation she'd given. His inquiries in town yielded little. Sarah Hargrove had appeared 6 months ago, well before Margaret had gone into labor. She'd paid cash for the abandoned cabin on the ridge, kept to herself. People said she had the touch, could heal animals and people alike. One afternoon, Jackson found Sarah in Margaret's library, running her fingers along book spines. "Margaret had good taste," Sarah said without turning. "Whitman, Dickens, Hardy." "She read constantly," Jackson replied, "even during cattle drives." Sarah smiled, pulled a volume from the shelf. "This one's worn. A favorite?" Jackson stepped closer, saw the familiar blue cover. Wuthering Heights. She read it every winter. Sarah opened it carefully. A pressed wildflower fell from between pages. A mountain bluebell, faded but still recognizable. "From our first summer here," Jackson said. "She collected them." Sarah replaced the flower, closed the book gently. "You must miss her terribly." "Every hour." He studied her with narrowed eyes. "You mentioned I was a surgeon once. Few know that history. Dr. Wilson speaks highly of your medical skills. Said you served together at Gettysburg." Jackson stiffened. He rarely spoke of those years. "Yes. He said you were brilliant, that you saved men others would have given up for lost." Jackson turned away, moved to the window. "Not all of them." "No one saves them all," Sarah said. Her voice was closer now. She'd moved to stand behind him. "Some matter more than others." Outside, the snow swirled in the lamplight, a dance of white against black. "Your friend?" she asked. Jackson nodded. "James Farley. We grew up together, followed each other to medical college, then to war. He took a bullet pulling a private from the field. I couldn't." His voice faltered. The bleeding wouldn't stop. They stood in silence, the storm raging outside, the quiet intimacy of shared understanding between them. "And you?" Jackson asked. After your husband? Sarah moved back to the bookshelf. I became a nurse during the war. That's how I met David. He was mapping terrain for the Union Army. After, we followed his work west. When he died, I stayed. It felt right. The mountains, the solitude. And your son? Sarah's face softened with memory, shadowed with pain. Thomas was unexpected, a gift after I'd given up hope of children. He had his father's curiosity, always exploring. The fever came suddenly, 3 days, and he was gone. She fell silent, her fingers tracing a knitting pattern for Grace, an intricate design of leaves and vines that Jackson had never seen before, except once. That pattern, Jackson said, it's unusual. Sarah looked up. My adoptive mother taught me. Family tradition. You were adopted? His interest sharpened. As an infant, my parents were kind people, loved me as their own. Did you ever, Jackson hesitated, did you ever wonder about your birth parents? A shadow crossed Sarah's face. My father, my adopted father, told me on his deathbed that my mother was very young, that she hadn't wanted to give me up. He thought I should know. Jackson felt a chill that had nothing to do with the winter cold. Margaret had once knitted a similar distinctive pattern for their first baby's blanket. She'd said it was a Prescott family design, passed down through generations. As spring advanced, roads cleared. People from town began visiting Reed Ranch, bringing condolences for Margaret and curiosity about Grace. Dr. Wilson was first to arrive. She's thriving, Wilson said, surprised. Much better than I'd expected. I found goat's milk that agreed with her, Jackson lied, not meeting his friend's eyes. Remarkable recovery. Wilson packed his medical bag. And you, how are you holding up? Before Jackson could answer, Sarah entered with coffee. Wilson's eyes narrowed slightly. Miss Hargrove, he extended his hand. We haven't formally met. Dr. Wilson, she nodded. Have you settled in well? It's unusual for a woman alone to take on frontier life. I manage. After she left, Wilson lowered his voice. Be careful, Jackson. Small towns talk. A widower with a young female housekeeper. It's not like that. Doesn't matter what it's like. Matters what it looks like. Wilson paused, his expression thoughtful. There's something familiar about Miss Hargrove. Jackson felt his shoulders tense. What about her? Those eyes, I've seen them before. Wilson studied Jackson's face. They remind me of Margaret. Later that night, Wilson wrote a letter addressed to Boston, to Eleanor Prescott, Margaret's mother. He'd had suspicions for weeks. Now he needed confirmation. The delegation arrived a week later. Reverend Wells, Mrs. Victoria Holt, and Judge Thornton stood on Jackson's porch, faces solemn with rehearsed concern. Mr. Reed, Reverend Wells began, we come not only with condolences, but with concern for your situation. Jackson's jaw tightened. My situation seems manageable. A man alone with an infant, it's challenging, Mrs. Holt interjected. And there are appearances to consider. Propriety. A young woman living under your roof, unmarried, without proper supervision, it invites talk. She sleeps in the guest wing, Jackson said coldly. Even so, Reverend Wells' voice was firm. For Grace's sake, for your reputation, we suggest a more appropriate arrangement. Mrs. Thompson is available, Mrs. Holt said. A respectable widow experienced with children. The community would feel more at ease. Jackson was about to refuse when Sarah entered carrying Grace. The baby was smiling, reaching for Sarah's hair. The room fell silent. Later that evening, after they'd gone, Jackson poured himself a whiskey. They want me to dismiss you. Sarah continued her knitting, not looking up. Will you? They threatened to question my fitness as Grace's guardian. Her hand stilled. Then you must do what's best for Grace. Is sending you away what's best for her? Sarah met his eyes. Sometimes what's right and what's necessary aren't the same thing, Mr. Reed. 2 days later, Mrs. Thompson arrived with her trunks. Sarah packed her few belongings silently. Jackson couldn't look at her as she said goodbye to Grace. "Thank you," he managed. The words tasted like ashes. Sarah nodded once, then walked out into the spring sunshine, back straight, head high. Jackson watched her disappear up the path toward her cabin. A week passed. Grace grew fussy, refusing the bottle Mrs. Thompson offered. Her skin grew hot to the touch. Her breathing became labored. "She needs a doctor," Mrs. Thompson said, wringing her hands. Jackson sent for Wilson, who came immediately. His diagnosis was grim. "Pneumonia. It's back and worse. We need to break her fever." They tried everything. Cool cloths, steam from boiling herbs. Nothing helped. By nightfall, Grace's breathing had become a terrible rattle. "I've done all I can," Wilson said, his face grave. "I'm sorry, Jackson." After Wilson left, Jackson stood by the cradle, watching his daughter fight for each breath. Mrs. Thompson hovered nearby, her stern face softened with worry. "There is one thing," she said hesitantly. Jackson looked up. "The Hargrove woman, she has knowledge of healing." "You believe in that?" Mrs. Thompson's mouth tightened. "I believe in anything that might save a child." Jackson grabbed his coat. "Stay with her." The storm that had been threatening all day broke as he rode toward Sarah's cabin. Rain lashed his face. Lightning split the sky. His horse slipped in the mud, but he drove it forward. Sarah's cabin was dark when he arrived. He hammered on the door, calling her name. No answer. He forced the door open. The cabin was empty. On the table lay a note. "Leaving at first light. It's better this way." Jackson cursed, scanning the darkened interior. Boxes were stacked by the door. She hadn't left yet. Where would she go in this storm? A flash of lightning illuminated the trail leading higher into the mountains. Jackson remounted and followed, rain blinding him, mud sucking at his horse's hooves. He found her in a small cave, sheltering from the storm. She rose when he appeared, water streaming from his hat and coat. "Grace?" Fear sharpened her voice. "Dying." The word tore from his throat. "Come back, please." Sarah hesitated, her face unreadable in the dim light. "They'll run me out of town, or worse." "I won't let them. I'll protect you." "Why should I believe you? You sent me away once." Jackson stepped closer, rain dripping from his clothes. "I was wrong. I chose what was easy over what was right." Another flash of lightning revealed the struggle on her face. "Sarah, please. She's your sister." Her head snapped up. "What did you say?" "I found Margaret's journal. She had a daughter at 16. Her parents forced her to give the baby up, then told her the child had died." Jackson's voice softened. "She never stopped looking for you." Sarah's face crumpled. "I came too late. I came to find her, traced her from Boston to Montana. But I arrived 2 weeks after her death." "That's why you came to help Grace that night. You knew who she was." "My sister," Sarah whispered, "the only blood family I have left." They rode back together through the storm, mud splashing beneath hooves, thunder cracking overhead. By the time they reached the ranch, both were soaked to the skin. Mrs. Thompson met them at the door, her face tight with worry. "Her fever's climbing." Sarah didn't hesitate. She went straight to Grace, lifting the baby from the cradle. "Boil water, bring clean cloths, and whiskey, the strongest you have." For the next hour, they worked in tense silence. Sarah held Grace upright, patting her back to loosen the congestion. Jackson replaced cool cloths on his daughter's forehead. Mrs. Thompson kept water boiling, herbs steeping. Grace coughed, horrible wrenching spasms that shook her tiny frame. But the coughs began to sound productive rather than dry. The wheeze eased slightly. That's it, Sarah murmured. Brave girl. Another hour passed. Grace's fever remained high, but her breathing seemed less labored. Sarah continued to hold her, refusing all offers to rest. She needs consistency, Sarah said, and warmth. Mrs. Thompson, observing the three of them, wore an expression Jackson couldn't quite read, something between disapproval and reluctant admiration. You've done this before, she said to Sarah. Sarah nodded without looking up from Grace. I lost my son to fever last spring. I know what to watch for. Something softened in Mrs. Thompson's stern face. I lost a daughter in childbirth, and her baby with her, 20 years ago now. Jackson glanced at her in surprise. In all the years he'd known Martha Thompson, she'd never spoken of her personal life. That's why I do things as I do. By the rules, Mrs. Thompson continued. I thought if I'd been stricter with my Jenny, more careful. It wasn't your fault, Sarah said gently. No more than my son was mine, or Mr. Reed's wife was his. Mrs. Thompson looked up, her eyes meeting Jackson's. We do what we can. Sometimes it isn't enough. By morning, Grace's fever had broken. Her breathing, while still congested, had lost the terrifying rattle. She's fighting, Sarah said, allowing herself a small smile. She's her mother's daughter, Jackson replied. Both of her mothers. 2 weeks later, a grand delegation arrived unannounced. Victor Harrington from the Territorial Council led them, his silver hair impeccable, his cold eyes assessing. Behind him stood Reverend Wells, Judge Thornton, and several town council members. Mrs. Holt sat primly in their midst, looking vindicated. Mr. Reed, Harrington began, I regret this intrusion, but the matter seemed urgent. What matter is that? Jackson asked, his voice dangerously calm. Harrington gestured to a document on the table. A petition signed by several concerned citizens regarding the welfare of your infant daughter. Questions about the environment in which she's being raised. Grace is perfectly healthy, Jackson stated, as Dr. Wilson can attest. Her physical health is not in question, Harrington said smoothly. It's her moral and spiritual welfare that concerns us, the example being set. His cold gaze shifted to Sarah, who stood quietly by the fireplace. Miss Hargrove, I presume. Sarah met his eyes steadily. Yes. An unmarried woman living in the home of a recently widowed man, caring for his child, after being dismissed once already. Harrington shook his head. Surely you can see how this appears. Jackson's hand drifted toward his gun belt. Get out of my house. The Territorial Council takes child welfare seriously, Mr. Reed, Harrington replied, especially when the child in question is the heir to one of the largest ranches in Montana. And there it was, the real concern, not Grace's welfare, but her inheritance. There's something you should know, Sarah stepped forward. I am not merely Miss Hargrove, nurse to Grace Reed. I am Sarah Prescott Hargrove, daughter of Margaret Prescott Reed, Grace's half-sister. A stunned silence fell over the room. Reverend Wells's mouth dropped open. Judge Thornton's eyebrows shot up. Mrs. Holt made a small strangle sound. That's quite a claim, Harrington said finally. Do you have proof? We do, Jackson said. Margaret's journal detailing her search for the daughter she was forced to give up at 16, and the front door burst open. Eleanor Prescott swept in, still regal despite her journey. Her eyes locked immediately on Sarah. Mother, Sarah said quietly. Eleanor froze. I never... She stopped, staring at Sarah's face, at the eyes so like her daughter's, at the small mark near her left ear, the same Margaret had been born with. I received Dr. Wilson's letter 3 weeks ago, Eleanor said, her voice unsteady. I left Boston immediately. I had to see for myself. Eleanor, Jackson said formally, your granddaughter would like to meet you. Eleanor Prescott's composure cracked. She crossed the room in 3 strides and took Sarah's face in her hands. "Oh my God! It's true, you're hers!" Tears streamed down her aristocratic face. "I told her you were dead. I thought it was kinder." Harrington cleared his throat. "This is all very touching, but it doesn't change." "Be quiet, Victor," Eleanor snapped. "You've done enough damage." Harrington blanched. "I don't know what you mean." "Don't you?" Eleanor turned to face him fully. "Shall I tell everyone here who fathered Margaret's child at 16? Who disappeared to Europe when she discovered she was with child? Whose family paid handsomely to keep the scandal quiet?" The color drained from Harrington's face. His hand moved toward his coat pocket. Jackson's peacemaker cleared leather before Harrington's fingers touched his weapon. "I wouldn't," Jackson said softly. Judge Thornton stood. "I believe this petition has been rendered moot. Mr. Reed's fitness as a guardian is not in question, particularly with his daughter's sister and grandmother now present in the household." He turned to Harrington. "And Victor, I believe the council will want to review your position given these revelations." Harrington's jaw worked. "This isn't over, Reed." "Yes," Jackson said, holstering his pistol slowly. "It is." He moved to the door, held it open. "Get off my land." 2 days later, the town newspaper reported Victor Harrington's sudden resignation from the Territorial Council and his hasty departure east on the morning train. Summer bloomed across the valley. Grace grew stronger each day, crawling determinedly across polished floors, reaching for sunbeams that danced through windows. Sarah remained at Reed Ranch, moving from the guest wing to the family quarters to be closer to her sister. Eleanor purchased a small property nearby, visiting often to spend time with her granddaughters. The town's gossip eventually subsided, replaced by new scandals, new concerns. One evening, Jackson found Sarah on the shooting range he'd built behind the house. She was practicing with a small Remington revolver, her stance determined but awkward. "Elbow higher," he said, stepping up beside her, "and widen your stance. You're fighting the gun." Sarah adjusted her position. "I need to learn, for Grace's protection." "You're doing well, better than most beginners." He watched her fire 3 shots at the target. 2 hit near the center. "Very well indeed." "Thank you for teaching me," Sarah said, lowering the weapon. "This is your home now," Jackson said. "You should be able to defend it." Later, as sunset painted the distant mountains gold, they sat on the porch. Grace slept in Sarah's arms, one small hand curled around her sister's finger. "She loves you," Jackson said, sitting beside them. "And I her." Sarah smiled down at the sleeping child. "Thank you for letting me stay." "This is your home now," Jackson repeated, "for as long as you want it." Sarah studied his face. "And what do you want, Jackson?" He considered the question, looking out over the land that had been his sole focus for so long. "Peace, I think. Something I haven't had since the war." "Is that possible? For men like you? Men like me? Men who've seen too much, done too much?" Jackson nodded slowly. "Maybe not peace, then. Purpose. You have that in Grace." "Yes," he agreed, "and in this land, in making something that will outlast me." They sat in comfortable silence as the light faded from the sky. Not husband and wife, not lovers, but family, bound by a child, by shared grief, by promises kept. "Will you stay?" Jackson asked finally. "Not just for Grace, but for yourself?" Sarah looked out over the valley at the life she'd found in this unexpected place. "Yes," she said, "this is where I belong now." "Good," Jackson said simply. He reached out, not for her hand, but for the rifle propped against the porch rail. "Tomorrow we'll practice with the Winchester. Every Reed should know how to handle a rifle." Sarah smiled, understanding what he was offering. Not romance, but something perhaps more valuable on the frontier. Acceptance, protection, family. In the fading light, Jackson Reed nodded once. It was enough. They had tomorrow and the day after. Time to heal. Time to build something from the ashes of what they'd lost. Not love, perhaps, but something just as vital. Something that would sustain them through the long Montana winters, in the harsh summers to come. Family, forged in blood and sacrifice, stronger than any empire built on gold or cattle. The true wealth of the millionaire cowboy.